250 kilograms of high explosive, fused for contact detonation, spinning through humid air at better than 300 miles per hour, falling not toward ocean, but toward teak-planked flight deck. August 24, 1942, 4:17 p.m. local time, somewhere northeast of Malta in the Solomon Islands chain. The bomb had separated from a Type 99 carrier dive bomber at roughly 1,500 feet, which gave it maybe 4 seconds of flight time, 4 seconds between release and impact. The pilot who dropped it, pulling out of his dive with gray spots flooding his vision, belonged to the Japanese carrier Shokaku's air group. He'd done everything right. Textbook Aichi dive bombing attack, steep angle, committed through the anti-aircraft fire, released inside parameters. The bomb hit USS Enterprise on her flight deck, just aft of the number 2 elevator. And here's what I want you to do before I get into the rest of this. Drop a comment telling me how many times you think the Japanese hit Enterprise during the war. Total. Bombs, kamikazes, everything. Watch to the end and check your number. Hit like if you got it wrong, and subscribe if you want more of these, because this story gets stranger the deeper it goes. That first bomb blew a 10-foot hole through the flight deck and detonated 1 level below, killing 35 men in a gun gallery. Within 4 minutes, 2 more bombs struck her. The second penetrated deeper, punching through to the 3rd deck and igniting fires near the powder magazines. The third hit aft, warping the deck plates and jamming the number 3 elevator in place. Enterprise burned. She listed. Smoke poured from her hull in columns visible for miles. Japanese strike pilots, circling at altitude to assess results, reported her sinking. Shokaku's air officer logged a carrier killed. She landed aircraft 49 minutes later. Not emergency landings on a crippled deck with nowhere else to go. Operational recovery of combat air patrol fighters, controlled approaches, tailhook catches on a patched and still smoking flight deck. Repair crews had steel plates welded over the bomb holes before the fires finished burning out. The damage control teams worked with acetylene torches in compartments where the paint on the bulkheads had blistered and the air tasted like burnt rubber and cordite. Enterprise made 24 knots within an hour of being hit. By the next morning, she conducted offensive flight operations. The Japanese pilots who'd watched her burn had every reason to believe they'd killed her. Every report filed, bomb damage assessments, intelligence summaries, after-action logs, confirmed it. And for the next 3 years of the Pacific War, those intelligence summaries kept saying so, kept reporting Enterprise sunk or fatally crippled, while she kept showing up at the next battle. Guadalcanal, Santa Cruz, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The Japanese started calling her the Gray Ghost because she refused to stay dead, their own nickname for an American ship. Think about what that means. An enemy so frustrated by a single warship's refusal to die that they gave her a supernatural name. So why couldn't they sink her? Eastern Solomons put bombs into her deck. Santa Cruz did it again 2 months later. A kamikaze hit her off Okinawa in 1945 that blew her forward elevator 400 feet into the air. The famous photograph, a 3-ton slab of steel tumbling skyward like a playing card. Every time, the same result. Fires, casualties, damage reports filed in Tokyo, claiming success, and every time Enterprise came back. The easy answer is damage control. American damage control procedures outclassed the Japanese navies by a margin that bordered on obscene. But that's not the whole answer, and it's not even the interesting part. The interesting part is what made Enterprise's crew different from the crews of carriers that did sink. Hornet, Yorktown at Midway, the ones that took similar punishment and went under. The records from Enterprise's damage control officer tell a specific story about training and pre-positioned equipment, about decisions made in the first 90 seconds after impact. The Japanese Navy's own post-war assessments, the ones conducted under American supervision starting in 1945, contain admissions about American carrier survivability that border on disbelief. To understand why Enterprise absorbed punishment that killed her sister ships, we have to go back to a set of decisions made before the war started, in shipyards and training facilities that nobody thought mattered at the time. How many times can you kill the same ship before you start questioning your own intelligence reports? Tokyo's answer, apparently, was at least three. Imperial General Headquarters publicly declared Enterprise sunk after Eastern Solomons in August 1942. They declared her sunk again after Santa Cruz in October, a third time after she took a torpedo bomber's payload off the Stewart Islands in late 1943. Each announcement followed the same pattern. Strike pilots returned to their carriers, described fires and explosions consistent with fatal damage, and intelligence officers compiled those observations into formal assessments. The assessments climbed the chain. Newspapers in Tokyo printed the results. Radio broadcasts celebrated. And then, weeks or months later, American signals intelligence would intercept confused Japanese communiques, trying to reconcile the reappearance of a carrier whose hull number and air group markings matched a ship they'd already crossed off the order of battle. The USSBS post-war interrogations captured this frustration in clinical language. Captain Fuchida Mitsuo, the man who'd led the Pearl Harbor strike, told American interrogators that repeated sinking claims for the same vessel created significant uncertainty in fleet intelligence assessments. That's diplomatic phrasing for a problem that corroded Japanese operational planning from 1942 onward. If your intelligence says a carrier is dead and she shows up at the next engagement, launching dauntless dive bombers at your cruisers, what else is your intelligence wrong about? But something nags at me. Enterprise took hits that sank other carriers. Not comparable hits, the same category of weapon, delivered the same way, into ships of similar displacement and similar construction. Yorktown absorbed 2 bomb hits and 2 torpedo hits at Midway and sank. Hornet took bomb hits, torpedo hits, and kamikaze strikes at Santa Cruz and sank. Both Yorktown-class carriers, same basic hull design as Enterprise, same structural engineering, same armor scheme. Enterprise took 3 bomb hits at Eastern Solomons and conducted flight operations the next day. She took another bomb hit at Santa Cruz, the same battle that killed Hornet, plus 2 near misses that buckled hull plates below the waterline, and she steamed under her own power to Noumea for repairs. Same class of ship, same ocean, same enemy ordnance, different outcome. Why? The standard explanation points to damage control training, and it's not wrong, but it's incomplete in a way that irritates me, because the records actually contain a more specific answer. Enterprise's damage control officer from 1941 through 1943, Lieutenant Commander Herschel Smith, left paperwork. Not memoirs written decades later with the benefit of hindsight. Contemporary reports filed within days of each engagement, describing exactly what his teams did in the first 90 seconds after bomb impact, and why those 90 seconds determined whether the ship lived or died. Smith's reports sit in the National Archives. They're not classified. They describe a system of pre-positioned damage control equipment, hoses already connected to mains, portable pumps staged at calculated intervals, repair lockers stocked according to a scheme Smith developed based on wargaming-specific hit scenarios before Enterprise ever took fire. The man had his crews rehearse responses to bomb penetrations on specific decks, specific frames, specific compartments, not generic firefighting drills. Scenario-specific response plans tied to the ship's actual geometry. Look at the contrast. Japanese carrier damage control in 1942 relied on centralized coordination from the bridge or a single damage control station. American Doctrine had already moved toward distributed authority, individual repair parties authorized to act without waiting for orders. Enterprise pushed that further than Doctrine required. Smith's teams didn't wait for assessment. They moved toward the sound of the explosion and began counter-flooding and firefighting while shoring up structural damage, following pre-briefed plans for that section of the ship. At Eastern Solomons, Repair Party 5 had water on the gun gallery fire within 40 seconds of the first bomb hit. 40 seconds. The compartment still had men dying in it. The Japanese Navy had nothing equivalent. Not because Japanese sailors lacked courage or competence. Midway proved they'd fight fires until they collapsed from smoke inhalation. They lacked the system. Their damage control doctrine in 1942 amounted to brave men improvising under conditions that demanded engineering precision. The USSBS Technical Report on Japanese Naval Construction notes that Japanese carriers carried fewer fire mains per linear foot of hull than their American counterparts, fewer portable pumps, fewer pre-positioned repair materials. The deficit wasn't willpower. It came down to industrial philosophy and pre-war investment in unglamorous infrastructure, pumps, piping, foam generators, training hours spent crawling through darkened compartments pretending they were on fire. Enterprise survived because someone decided that rehearsing for catastrophe mattered more than rehearsing for victory. Newport News, Virginia, 1934. Dry Dock 12 at Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, where the keel of hull number 390 got laid down on a July afternoon, so humid the welder's gloves left sweat stains on the steel. That hull would become USS Enterprise, CV-6, the second of 3 Yorktown-class fleet carriers, sandwiched between Yorktown herself and Hornet. All 3 built to the same drawings, the same specifications, the same Washington Naval Treaty constraints that capped displacement at 19,800 tons standard. Same ships, but the drawings tell a story that matters more than the names painted on the sterns. The Yorktown class carried 4 inches of belt armor along the waterline. Not thick by battleship standards, but nobody expected carriers to slug it out at gun range. What mattered sat inside the hull. The designers at Newport News and the Bureau of Ships divided the interior into a honeycomb of watertight compartments separated by bulkheads rated to withstand flooding pressure from adjacent spaces. Enterprise contained over 200 individually sealable compartments below the waterline. 200. A bomb could flood 6 of them, and the ship lost maybe 2 degrees of list, correctable by counter-flooding opposite voids in under 3 minutes if the damage control party knew which valves to open. Smith's teams knew which valves to open because they'd memorized the counter-flooding tables for every combination of damaged compartments on the ship. The fire mains ran in a loop system, not a single trunk line where one break killed water pressure to everything forward or aft, but a ring that could be isolated in sections. Cut the main between frames 80 and 90. The ring fed from the other direction. Lose both feeds to a section. Portable P250 pumps, gasoline-powered, drawing from the sea through auxiliary intakes, could substitute. Enterprise carried 14 of those pumps pre-staged at repair lockers throughout the ship. 14 pumps for a crew that had rehearsed exactly where to drag them and exactly which fittings to connect. Compare that to what Enterprise fought against. The Japanese Shokaku class, the carriers Enterprise faced at Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz, displaced roughly 25,000 tons, actually larger than a Yorktown. More steel, more displacement. On paper, more capacity to absorb damage. But the USSBS survey of captured Japanese construction documents found that Shokaku's internal subdivision used fewer watertight bulkheads per unit length of hull. Fewer compartments meant each flooded space represented a larger percentage of total buoyancy. The math is brutal and simple. Flood 3 compartments on Enterprise, and she settles a few inches. Flood 3 compartments on Shokaku, and she takes a measurable list that affects flight operations. The ventilation system compounded the problem. American carriers ran forced draft ventilation through the hangar deck with closable intake and exhaust dampers at every section. Hit the ship, close the dampers, starve the fire of fresh air, while your teams hit it with fog nozzle applicators spraying seawater mist. Japanese carriers in 1942 ventilated their hangars through open sides, a design choice that provided natural airflow in tropical heat and also provided natural oxygen to any fire that started below the flight deck. At Midway, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu all burned with a ferocity that stunned their own crews. Damage control parties reported flames racing through hangar spaces faster than men could run from them. The ventilation fed the fires like a bellows. None of this showed up in Jane's fighting ships. No intelligence officer in Tokyo could have thumbed through a reference volume and found a table comparing fire main loop redundancy or portable pump inventory per carrier class. These details lived in construction drawings, training syllabi, and logistics manifests, the unglamorous paperwork of industrial shipbuilding that no one spied on because no one thought it decided wars. but it decided whether Enterprise lived or died every single time a Japanese bomb found her deck. The Yorktown class gave Smith and his damage control teams a hull that cooperated with their training. Compartments small enough to isolate, fire mains redundant enough to survive multiple breaks, pumps numerous enough to substitute for damaged systems, ventilation controllable enough to choke a fire before it spread. The ship and the crew formed a match system. The hull built to be saved, the crew trained to save it. Shokaku's crew fought just as hard. They just fought inside a hull that gave them less to work with, against fires that burned faster, with fewer tools staged in fewer places. The hull mattered. But the hull alone doesn't explain what happened at Santa Cruz. 4:12 p.m., August 24, 1942. Enterprise steaming at 27 knots into a headwind, recovering fighters, when the radar plot called out incoming bogies at bearing 320, range 88 miles. By 4:14, the Combat Air Patrol had engaged, Wildcats slashing into a formation of 36 Japanese aircraft, Val dive bombers, and Kate torpedo planes mixed together in a strike package launched from Shokaku and Zukaku. The Wildcats broke up the torpedo planes. Most of the Kates never reached drop range, but the Vals kept coming, nosing over into their dives from 12,000 feet in groups of 3, and Enterprise's 5-inch guns couldn't traverse fast enough to track them all. 4:17. First bomb. Frame 93, starboard side, punching through the flight deck planking and detonating in the 5-inch gun gallery below. The blast killed 35 men instantly, not from the explosion itself, but from the fragmentation and the pressure wave channeled through a confined steel space. Sailors on the hangar deck, one level up, felt the deck plates jump under their feet. The smell hit before the smoke did. A chemical stink of detonated TNT mixed with burning teak and something worse underneath. The smell that men who survived it described without elaborating. 4:18. Second bomb. This one hit further aft and bored deeper, penetrating to the third deck before it exploded. The detonation ruptured a fuel oil service tank and started a fire that crept toward the after powder magazines. Repair Party 3 felt the heat through the bulkhead before they saw flame. Temperature in the adjacent passageway climbed fast enough that the paint started bubbling off the overhead in long strips. 4:21. Third bomb. Aft again, near the number 3 elevator, detonating on contact with the flight deck and blowing the elevator platform into a crumpled obstruction jammed at a 15-degree angle. The blast killed 39 men topside, gun crews mostly, and flight deck handlers who'd been scrambling for cover between parked aircraft. Enterprise now had 3 holes in her flight deck, fires burning on multiple levels, a jammed elevator, and a 2-degree list to starboard from flooding in the starboard void spaces. 74 men dead. The ship on fire from frame 80 to frame 110. Smith's damage control organization activated exactly the way he drilled it. Repair Party 5 hit the gun gallery fire with fog nozzles within 40 seconds, those pre-connected hoses paying off in seconds that mattered. Repair Party 3 attacked the deep fire near the magazines by flooding the adjacent compartments, a counter-flooding decision made by the Repair Party leader on his own authority. No phone call to the bridge, no waiting for permission. He opened the valves because Smith had briefed him months earlier on exactly which valves to open if a bomb penetrated that section of the ship. The magazine temperature stabilized within 6 minutes. 6 minutes between potential catastrophic detonation and controlled situation. The flight deck crews worked in conditions that sound invented, but match the action reports. Welders dragged steel plates across a deck still hot enough to scorch leather boot soles, cutting and fitting patches over the bomb holes, while ammunition from the wrecked gun galleries cooked off in sporadic pops below them. The smell of acetylene cutting torch mixed with smoke from fires that weren't fully out yet. One repair team rigged a portable pump to drain a flooded compartment while standing in water up to their shins, the water warm from ruptured steam lines somewhere deeper in the hull. By 5:06 p.m., 49 minutes after the first bomb hit, Enterprise turned into the wind and began recovering aircraft, controlled landings, arresting gear functional. The patched deck held. The Japanese side of this is what gets me. Shokaku's strike leader reported Enterprise burning, dead in the water, sinking by the stern. His report matched what he'd seen. Fires visible for miles, smoke columns consistent with fatal internal damage, the ship clearly slowed. He filed an honest assessment based on observable evidence. Every IJN carrier pilot who'd watched a ship burn like that had watched it sink afterward. Akagi burned like that. Kaga burned like that. Their experience told them a carrier on fire across multiple decks didn't come back. What they lacked, what no amount of professional competence could substitute for, was the knowledge that American damage control teams had rehearsed this exact scenario, in this exact section of this exact ship. Pre-positioned equipment staged for the hit pattern they were taking. By 6 the next morning, Enterprise launched a full strike package, 14 hours from near death to offensive operations. The after-action report from Shokaku's air group still listed her as sunk. Noumea, New Caledonia, mid-September 1942. Enterprise sat in the harbor with shipyard workers crawling over her flight deck, replacing the steel patches welded at sea with permanent repairs. She'd been there 3 weeks when word came down that Hornet, the only other operational American fleet carrier in the Pacific, needed support. Wasp had taken 3 torpedoes from I-19 on September 15th and gone down burning. That left 2 carriers for the entire Pacific theater. 2. So Enterprise got pulled out of repair early, with work still incomplete on her number 3 elevator, and sent back toward the Solomons to join Hornet for what became the Battle of Santa Cruz on October 26th. The Japanese found her again around 10 a.m. This time the strike came in 2 waves, VALs from Shokaku, Zuikaku, and the light carrier Zuiho, roughly 40 aircraft in the first pulse. Enterprise's combat air patrol and anti-aircraft guns tore into them, but 3 bombs connected. The first penetrated the flight deck forward of the island and detonated on the hangar deck, starting a fire among parked aircraft. The second hit near the bow, blowing a hole in the flight deck large enough to park a truck in. The third struck aft, again, rupturing steam lines and killing a repair party that had been staged exactly where Smith's Doctrine placed them. 2 near misses detonated close enough alongside to buckle hull plates below the waterline, opening seams that let seawater into void spaces on the port side. Why do they call her the Gray Ghost? The nickname doesn't appear in any official Navy document I can find before 1943. The earliest printed reference I've tracked sits in a press dispatch from early that year, attributed to Tokyo Rose broadcasts, claiming Enterprise had been sunk so many times she must be a ghost. The crew adopted it. They painted it on ready-room bulkheads and stenciled it onto flight deck equipment. A ship the enemy kept killing that kept showing up. Gray hull, Gray Ghost. The name stuck because the Japanese gave it to them, and you can't get more Enterprise than that. Back to Santa Cruz. Smith's teams faced a harder problem than Eastern Solomons. The forward bomb hit had wrecked aircraft on the hangar deck, and burning aviation gasoline produces heat that overwhelms fog nozzle applicators designed for solid fuel fires. The hangar deck sprinkler system, a feature Japanese carriers of this period did not carry, activated automatically and bought the repair parties roughly 90 seconds to drag foam generators into position. Those foam generators ran on a carbon dioxide propellant system that American carriers had adopted from civilian firefighting technology in the late 1930s. Shokaku carried nothing comparable. Her damage control teams fought aviation fuel fires with seawater, which spreads burning gasoline rather than smothering it. Enterprise's crew patched the forward flight deck hole using pre-cut steel plates stored in a damage control locker on the second deck. Pre-cut. Measured and shaped during the Noumea repair period to fit standard bomb hole dimensions based on the damage profiles from Eastern Solomons. Smith had looked at the holes Japanese bombs made in August and had plates fabricated to match. The after-action report from Santa Cruz, and I want to be precise here because this detail matters, notes that the forward patch took approximately 22 minutes from first weld to completion. The aft hole took longer because the repair party assigned to that section had taken casualties from the third bomb. A scratch team assembled from nearby parties finished it in 41 minutes. Hornet, hit in the same battle by the same aircraft types, dropping the same ordnance, burned uncontrollably. Her damage control teams fought with courage that nobody questions. But Hornet's repair parties followed standard Navy doctrine. Professional and slower than what Smith had built on Enterprise, Hornet's crew hadn't pre-cut patches. They'd never wargamed specific hit scenarios, tied to specific frame numbers, or memorized counter-flooding tables for every compartment combination. Captain Charles Mason ordered Hornet abandoned at 3:40 p.m. after fires reached spaces his teams couldn't suppress. The Japanese finished her with torpedoes that night. Same hull design, same armor, same enemy, same ordnance. Enterprise recovered aircraft before sunset. Hornet sank in the dark. The Japanese pilots who hit Enterprise at Santa Cruz filed reports nearly identical to the ones from Eastern Solomons. Fires consistent with fatal damage, explosions observed, ship believed sinking. Shokaku's intelligence section logged another kill. Tokyo celebrated. An Enterprise steamed south under her own power, trailing smoke from fires her crew had already beaten, carrying 44 dead men below decks in a ship that refused to stop fighting. Why couldn't they finish her off? Not for lack of trying. The IJN sent some of the most experienced carrier aviators on Earth against Enterprise, pilots who'd struck Pearl Harbor, who'd sunk Prince of Wales and Repulse, who'd burned Darwin. These men could put a 250-kilogram bomb through a ship's elevator from 12,000 feet in a crosswind. They hit Enterprise 6 times across 2 major engagements. They hit her accurately. So what went wrong? Nothing went wrong. Their bombs worked. Their aim worked. The tactics were sound. The execution professional. What failed was the assumption underneath all of it. The assumption that hitting a carrier hard enough to start fires on multiple decks meant killing it. That assumption held true for every Japanese carrier ever lost. It held true for Lexington at Coral Sea and Yorktown at Midway. It did not hold true for Enterprise, and the reason it didn't hold true comes down to a systematic American investment in the ugliest, least glamorous branch of naval warfare that exists. The Bureau of Ships published damage control manuals, the ship's damage control book, specific to each hull, that ran to hundreds of pages of counter-flooding tables, valve diagrams, and firefighting procedures keyed to individual frame numbers. Every Yorktown-class carrier received one. The manual for Enterprise cross-referenced each watertight compartment with its adjacent voids, listed the tonnage of seawater needed to counterflood each combination, and specified which valves to open in which sequence. The IJN had nothing equivalent. USSBS interrogators after the war asked surviving Japanese carrier officers about standardized damage control procedures and got answers that one interrogation summary characterized as informal and dependent on individual ship captains. Their word, informal. For a Navy that drilled gunnery and navigation with obsessive precision, damage control sat in a blind spot so large it swallowed 4 fleet carriers in a single afternoon at Midway. Cross-training made the American system resilient in a way the Japanese system structurally could not match. On Enterprise, every sailor assigned to a repair party held a primary battle station and a secondary damage control role. Gunners' mates who survived a turret hit became firefighters. Aviation machinists whose planes had already launched became pump operators. Smith rotated men through damage control drills so aggressively that by mid-1942, any enlisted man on the ship could operate a P-250 pump, connect a fog nozzle applicator, and read a counter-flooding table for his section. The Japanese Navy segregated damage control into small specialist teams, often drawn from the engineering division exclusively, meaning a single bomb that killed the assigned team left that section of the ship without trained responders. At Midway, Akagi took 1 bomb. 1. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's SBD Dauntless pilots put a single 500-pound bomb through Akagi's flight deck amidships at 10:25 a.m. on June 4th. The bomb detonated among armed and fueled aircraft on the hangar deck. The fire spread to torpedo storage. Akagi's damage control parties, 63 men in 3 teams for a ship of 1,500 crew, couldn't contain it. Captain Taijiro Aoki ordered the Emperor's portrait transferred off the ship by 1100. Akagi burned for 14 hours before Japanese destroyers torpedoed her. 1 bomb killed Akagi. 3 bombs couldn't kill Enterprise. That gap doesn't measure courage. Akagi's damage control teams died at their stations, trying to fight fires with equipment that couldn't match the heat output of burning aviation gasoline in an open-ventilated hangar. They had hoses and water. What they lacked was foam generators, carbon dioxide systems, automatic sprinklers, pre-staged portable pumps, or counter-flooding tables that let a petty officer make independent decisions about which compartments to flood. They fought the fire the way their training allowed them to fight it, and their training allowed them to lose. Smith's men fought fires the way American industrial process engineering told them to fight fires, with redundant systems, pre-positioned equipment, rehearsed procedures, and distributed authority that let the man at the valve make the call without waiting for the bridge. That philosophy came from the Bureau of Ships, from the Navy's pre-war firefighting schools, from an institutional culture that treated damage control not as a secondary skill, but as a core competency equal to gunnery or flight operations. The Japanese Navy never built that culture. Their carrier losses prove it, not as an argument, but as a body count. 4 fleet carriers at Midway, Shokaku at the Philippine Sea, Zukaku at Leyte Gulf, all burned beyond saving after hits that Enterprise absorbed and answered with a strike launch the next morning. I shall fall like a blossom from a radiant cherry tree. Lieutenant Junior Grade Isao Matsuo wrote those words to his parents in Nagasaki before climbing into a Zero loaded with a 250-kilogram bomb on an April morning in 1945. His letter survived because his family kept it. He didn't survive because that was the point. The Kamikaze Corps represented something Enterprise's damage control teams had never trained for. An enemy who didn't need to pull out of his dive, who could correct his aim all the way to impact and turn his aircraft and his body into a guided munition. Bombs fell in predictable ballistic arcs. A kamikaze adjusted. Enterprise arrived off Okinawa in mid-April 1945 as a night fighter carrier, launching radar-equipped Hellcats into the dark to intercept Japanese raids before they reached the picket destroyers. She'd been refitted, upgraded, patched so many times that veteran sailors joked the only original equipment left aboard was the commissioning plaque. Her damage control organization had 3 years of institutional memory baked into it. Procedures refined after Eastern Solomons, updated after Santa Cruz, then pressure tested at the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. Smith had rotated off the ship by then, but the system he built ran on doctrine, not personality. The men who operated it in 45 had learned from men who'd operated it in 42. April 11th. A Zero came out of low cloud cover off the port bow at 5:40 p.m., too fast and too close for the 5-inch battery to track. The 40mm Bofors mounts hit it, rounds punching through the engine cowling, shredding the port wing root, but the pilot held his line. The aircraft struck the port side forward of the island, the bomb detonating on the hangar deck and blowing a hole in the flight deck roughly 25 feet across. Fires started in the hangar bay, among aircraft being serviced. The repair parties killed the fire in 17 minutes using the foam generation system and hangar sprinklers. Enterprise continued flight operations within 2 hours. That hit would have been the climax of any other ship's war story. For Enterprise, it counted as a Tuesday. May 11th changed the math. 2 kamikazes inbound simultaneously from different bearings. A coordinated approach designed to split the anti-aircraft fire. The combat air patrol splashed the first one at 800 yards. The second one got through. A Zero carrying a bomb struck the forward flight deck at the base of the number 1 elevator at 6:56 a.m., and the detonation did something that photographs from the escort destroyers captured in a single frozen frame that still stops me every time I look at it. The forward elevator, a steel platform roughly 44 feet long and 44 feet wide, weighing several tons, launched vertically into the air, 400 feet. The blast threw it higher than the ship's mast, tumbling end over end like a playing card flicked off a table, and it crashed back down onto the flight deck in a crumpled mass of bent steel and sheared hydraulic lines. The detonation killed 14 men and blew a hole through the ship from the flight deck to the second deck below. 3 levels of structural steel, gone. Enterprise's forward flight deck ceased to exist as a functional surface. The #1 elevator shaft gaped open to the hangar deck below, edges of torn steel plate curling inward like peeled tin. Fires burned on the hangar deck and in the elevator pit, spreading into compartments adjacent to the shaft. The blast had ruptured firefighting mains in the forward section, forcing repair parties to drag hoses from amidships connections, exactly the kind of contingency Smith's original Doctrine had anticipated by pre-positioning backup supply manifolds. The crew fought the fires for 3 hours. They won. Enterprise didn't recover aircraft after this one. The damage exceeded what any repair party could patch at sea, not because the fires beat them, but because the elevator machinery had been destroyed beyond temporary repair, and the structural damage to the flight deck forward made arrested landings unsafe. She turned east under her own power, steaming for Puget Sound Navy Yard, and she made it there without escort, a ship missing a quarter of her flight deck, crossing 4,000 miles of open ocean on her own engineering plant. The kamikazes had finally done what 6 conventional bombs across 3 years couldn't. They pulled Enterprise out of the war. They never sank her. The USSBS post-war interrogation records show Japanese naval intelligence listed Enterprise as sunk or destroyed on 5 separate occasions between 1942 and 1945. She outlived every single assessment. No ship in the history of the United States Navy fought in more engagements, survived more damage, made a bigger fool of enemy intelligence, or refused to die with more stubborn regularity than CV-6. 20 battle stars. Count them against the war's calendar, and something absurd emerges. Enterprise participated in every major carrier action in the Pacific, from Pearl Harbor to Okinawa, except Coral Sea. And she missed that one, only because she arrived 48 hours late, steaming back from the Doolittle raid. Every other fight, she showed up. Midway, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Her air groups destroyed or assisted in the destruction of 911 enemy aircraft. Her pilots sank 71 ships. She launched strikes on the opening day of the war and took her last hit in the closing months. No other vessel in any navy compiled a combat record that dense across that many theaters over that long a span. The Japanese kept trying to subtract her from the equation. 5 times their intelligence apparatus declared Enterprise destroyed, and 5 times she reappeared on their operational plots like a clerical error that wouldn't resolve. USSBS interrogators sat down with captured IJN staff officers in the autumn of 1945 and asked them to reconcile the discrepancy. How do you sink the same carrier 5 times? Captain Toshikazu Omae, who'd served on the Naval General Staff, gave an answer that one interrogation transcript records with what I'd call visible frustration on the part of the questioner. Omae explained that pilot reports formed the primary basis for damage assessments and that pilots reported what they believed they saw. The interrogator pressed, "Did anyone cross-reference these claims against subsequent sighting reports?" Omae's response amounted to an acknowledgement that confirmation procedures broke down under operational tempo. Pilots said they sank a carrier. Intelligence logged a carrier sunk. Nobody checked whether that carrier kept launching aircraft the following week. The failure went deeper than sloppy bookkeeping. The IJN built its carrier doctrine around the strike. The Alpha Strike, the massed launch that overwhelms defenses and kills the target in a single coordinated attack. Everything about Japanese naval aviation optimized for offensive output. Pilot selection, training syllabi, torpedo development, dive bombing technique, all of it aimed at delivering maximum violence in the first pass. What happened after the bombs hit belonged to someone else's problem set, and that someone else barely existed. Damage assessment got treated as an administrative function, not an operational one. So when pilots reported Enterprise burning from stem to stern, with her flight deck wrecked, and she looked exactly that way multiple times, the system had no mechanism to question the conclusion. The Americans had a word for what Enterprise represented, though they didn't use it until decades later. Resilience, the ability to absorb punishment, maintain function, return to offensive capability, and do all of it faster than the enemy's planning cycle could account for. Enterprise didn't just survive hits. She survived hits and then launched strikes, recovered aircraft, steamed into the next engagement, and did it all before Japanese intelligence updated their order of battle. She moved faster than their paperwork. Machinist Mate First Class Robert Jones died at his station in the forward elevator pit on May 11, 1945, at 6:56 a.m., 4,000 miles from his home in Decatur, Illinois. He'd served aboard Enterprise since 1943. His duty station put him directly beneath the platform that a kamikaze blast threw 400 feet into the sky. The muster roll lists him among 14 killed. His service record occupies a single page in the National Personnel Records Center, a page that survived the 1973 fire only because Navy records sat in a different wing than Army files. Jones never knew the ship made it home. He died keeping her alive. Enterprise steamed into Puget Sound on June 7, 1945, with a hole in her bow where the forward elevator used to be and scorch marks running the length of her island superstructure. She'd carried her dead 4,000 miles across the Pacific, through waters she'd fought to control since 1942, on an engineering plant that never failed her. The yard workers who saw her come in described a ship that looked like she'd been dragged through a furnace. She had been, several times. The enemy lit the fire every chance they got. The crew put it out every time. And the Japanese Navy, a service that prized warrior spirit above all material considerations, spent 3 years learning that spirit alone cannot sink a ship full of Americans who brought better pumps. Barrett Tillman spent years digging through Enterprise's deck logs, action reports, and crew interviews before writing the line that stuck. The most glorious and honored vessel in the history of the United States Navy. He meant it as a statement of fact, not sentiment, and the record backs him up. 20 battle stars, 911 aircraft destroyed, 71 ships sunk, 5 separate death notices from Tokyo, all of them premature. No other warship in any fleet assembled that resume across 3.5 years of continuous combat. But Enterprise didn't survive because she got lucky, and Tillman knew it. She survived because she carried the output of an entire national system inside her hull, a system the Imperial Japanese Navy could observe, suffer under, and never replicate. The Bureau of Ships designed her damage control infrastructure. The Bureau of Personnel trained her crews through standardized schools that graduated thousands of sailors a year in firefighting, counter-flooding, and emergency repair. American industry produced the P-250 portable pumps, the fog nozzle applicators, the aqueous film-forming foam concentrates, the pre-cut steel plates stored in her below-decks repair lockers. No headlines, no newsreels, but every single one of them kept Enterprise afloat on days when Japanese bombs and kamikazes tried to send her to the bottom. The Japanese Navy could train brilliant pilots and build fast carriers and lethal torpedoes. What they could not build, what their entire military-industrial structure lacked the depth to produce, was the boring, redundant, massively over-engineered support architecture that let an American crew repair a wrecked flight deck in 14 hours at sea. That architecture ran on industrial capacity, standardized training pipelines, and a philosophy that valued survival as much as attack. Japan had none of those things in sufficient quantity, and by mid-1943, they couldn't even replace the pilots they'd already lost, let alone the institutional knowledge those pilots carried. Enterprise came home from Okinawa in June 1945. She sat through the surrender. The Navy decommissioned her on February 17, 1947, at the New York Naval Shipyard, and she entered the Atlantic Reserve Fleet at Bayonne, New Jersey. For 11 years, she rusted there while veterans groups, civic organizations, and former crew members fought to save her. The fundraising went nowhere, and neither did the letters to congressmen. The Navy redesignated her as CVS-6, then as an aircraft transport, then struck her from the Naval Vessel Register on October 2, 1956. The Lipset Corporation of New York bought her hull for scrapping. Cutting torches hit her flight deck in 1958 at Kearney, New Jersey, the same flight deck that Japanese bombs struck at Eastern Solomons, that Japanese dive bombers cratered at Santa Cruz, that a kamikaze blew open off Okinawa. the most decorated warship in American history, went to the breakers because nobody in a position of authority thought she mattered enough to keep. The records at the National Archives contain letters from Enterprise crewmen written to the Secretary of the Navy during the scrapping fight. Most follow a standard format: service dates, battle participation, a request to preserve the ship as a memorial. One doesn't follow the format. Boatswain's Mate. Second Class James P. Barnett, who served aboard from 1943 to 1945, wrote 3 sentences. The file holds his letter on lined notebook paper, postmarked from Louisville, Kentucky, dated March 1956. Barnett's letter skips the case for historical preservation entirely. No battle stars, no famous engagements. The Records Office filed it with 73 other crew letters in a folder marked CV-6- Public Correspondence-Disposal. 73 letters from men who'd fought fires, patched steel, carried dead friends to the fantail, and steamed home on a ship held together by welds and stubbornness. 73 letters. The Navy scrapped her anyway. Barnett wrote, "She kept us alive when everything said we should have died. I don't know how to explain that to someone who wasn't there. I am asking you not to cut her up." 6 bombs, 2 kamikazes, 5 confirmed kills by Tokyo's own intelligence, 20 battle stars, 3 years, 8 months, and 6 days of continuous war. 1 ship. They cut her up.